Hello, I'm Michael Hainsworth. If you get in an elevator today with 3 other people, one of you will be retiring without a proper pension plan?
They've got a lot of things to worry about already. I mean, this is just another thing to worry about. So the easier that you can make it for them to basically sign up for something they understand, the more likely it is to happen.
Keith Ambachtsheer has been in the pension industry since Sugar Sugar by the Archies was playing on the radio.
You are my candy girl, and you got me wanting you.
He's the executive in residence and director emeritus for the International Center for Pension Management at the Rotman School of Management. Alex Mazur is the co-founder and CEO of Commonwealth. In their research report titled Spreading the Benefits, a targeted tax credit is needed to expand retirement plan coverage in Canada's private sector, we learned that more than 9 million Canadians don't have a workplace retirement plan. And most of them work for small to medium-sized businesses.
When you look at the research on why employers don't offer retirement benefits, the biggest reasons that come up are perceived cost and complexity. I say perceived because often when you actually get into the detail of it, the cost and complexity is not as great as the employers think.
The recommendation, a small employer retirement plan tax credit that would cost $1 billion, maybe $2 billion over the next 5 years. They join us now. Thank you for joining us.
Great to be here.
Keith, what does pension coverage actually look like across SMEs today?
It's 20%, something like that. The big story here is that most workers that work for small size organizations do not have a occupational pension plan.
Alex, SMEs employ a huge share of Canada's workforce. When those firms cannot offer retirement plans, how does that shape the overall retirement system?
The biggest gap is amongst private sector employers that are below 500 employees. So we find in the paper that only about 1 in 5 of employers between 400 and 500 employees have a workplace retirement plan. And that can put them at a pretty significant disadvantage relative to larger employers. I mean, it's a critical benefit for employees to have that they're often looking for. It's rated as one of the most highly valued benefits by employees. And these are small and mid-sized employers that are competing with large employers who have pretty well-established retirement programs. So that's kind of at the employer level. And I'd say at the plan member level, it means that where most Canadians work, they're highly unlikely to have retirement benefits. And that means that we calculate in the paper about 9 million Canadians in that segment of the economy that don't have workplace retirement plan coverage. And that can translate into a much higher risk of people not being able to maintain their standard of living when it comes to retirement.
And from what I've read of your report, we're talking about administrative complexity, regulatory requirements, fixed costs. Keith, is the fixed cost component really the one that we can have the most impact on? Is that what you're trying to tell us?
I think it's really important to understand the difference between being a member of an occupational pension plan, which leads to regular retirement savings, it leads to a good investment program, et cetera, versus not having that. If you do not have that, you're on your own. And you're dealing now as an individual, not schooled in these issues, with a fairly complex set of challenges in front of you, starting with regular savings. It's not automatic anymore. You have to think of it yourself. You have to think about how you invest the money. There's a lot of research out there that shows that people tend not to be great investors. They have behavioral biases. They do the wrong things at the wrong time in a lot of situations. So I think that, to me, is the biggest motivator for getting people into occupational pension plans. It does a lot of things for them that are very difficult for them to do on their own.
And so offloading that responsibility to a third party helps ensure that they have something in their golden years to enjoy. But companies don't want to provide these things. It sounds to me like it's a huge headache for a small to medium-sized business, and one that they're really not qualified to deal with.
Well, yeah, when you look at the research on why employers don't offer retirement benefits, the biggest reasons that come up are perceived cost and complexity. I say perceived because often when you actually get into the detail of it, the cost and complexity is not as great as the employers think. But the perception is extremely important because it goes to the willingness for them to spend time and effort on this when they have lots of other priorities. So part of the reason we propose a tax credit is because it really goes to the heart of the biggest objection that employers have to setting up plans, which is cost, and also helps them with the startup advice and costs, which goes to the issue of complexity. We think that a lot more employers would be willing to set up plans if they were given a bit of a nudge or a carrot. So, for example, if you look at the U.S., almost 50% of small employers have some kind of retirement plan at work, and that's a similarly structured market where offering retirement plans is voluntary and not mandatory, like in other markets like the UK or Australia. It's not exactly the same, but we think it's a reasonable comparison, and that our coverage could be a lot higher than 20%, maybe not quite 50%, but in the 30s or 40s for sure with the right infrastructure.
So how would the tax credit work?
So there are two components to the tax credit. The first component helps to cover the cost of setting up a new plan. So that could mean, getting advice on provider selection, setting up investments, doing education for your employees, onboarding into the plan. And then the even more significant part of the credit is help with the cost of employer matching, because that's something we really want to encourage, is the employer putting some money in to help with employee savings. So that would cover up to $1,000 per employee. The tax credit is for employers with 100 or fewer employees, so it matches the definition of small business or small employer that the federal government uses. And if you look at it overall, we think it could reduce the cost of setting up a new retirement plan by about 40% over the first 3 years. So it's a pretty meaningful impact on the cost of offering a plan, which goes to the main objection that employers often have to setting one up.
I wonder if there's an argument to be made that it's not just important that SMEs provide their employees with some sort of plan, but that it's in their benefit as well. Can we quantify the cost or the difficulty in attracting and retaining employees? Are workers turning down jobs because of this?
Retirement benefits are rated as one of the top most important forms of compensation by employees. And there's evidence that shows that sometimes employers even underestimate how important it is to employees because they may not be willing to raise it as an issue with their employer. They may not feel comfortable talking about that element of their personal finances. There's also evidence that offering a retirement plan can significantly decrease employee turnover, which is very costly, especially to an SMB who spent a lot of time, investing in an employee. And if they lose that employee, that can cost, months, if not years of pay to get a new person trained up and up to speed. And there's also interesting evidence on the productivity of employees when they feel more financially secure and less financially stressed. So we know that financial stress is one of the most common forms of anxiety that people have. And when they're focused on, living paycheck to paycheck, it becomes harder to focus on their work. So there's a case for if you offer a little bit more in the way of helping people to save, and they can build up a bit of that nest egg, they'll feel more financially resilient, more financially confident, and therefore there's a good chance they'll perform better, in their job.
The other part for employers is the complexity level is possibly quite significant unless, and I think this is where the provider side comes in, and I can say this better than Alex because he's one of the providers with Commonwealth organization, is that I think that we're getting better at providing these services to small size employers as to taking the complexity away from them and making it easier for them to do. Because I think that's been another big barrier, is that they've got a lot of things to worry about already. I mean, this is just another thing to worry about. So the easier that you can make it for them to basically sign up for something they understand, the more likely it is to happen.
Then help me understand and paint a picture for me, Keith, on what retirement insecurity among middle-income workers means for public retirement programs. What's the knock-on effect if we don't solve this problem?
Well, for me, the simplest thing is to do the math. So if we take somebody $80,000 a year, and then you basically look at replacing that in retirement for, again, pick a number, $50,000 a year as to what you need to maintain your standard of living post-work. And then the question is, okay, where does that $50,000 a year come from? And then the easy math is OAS plus CPP, but that only gets you about to $20,000. So where's the other 30 going to come from? And that's what we're talking about here, is to make up that big gap between what the public sector provides in terms of OAS and CPP and what's likely to be required for people to maintain their standard of living. And the other element, by the way, of that is lifetime income, making the money last for the life of the actual recipient of the pension. So there's some elements there that need to be thought about as to how to actually make that understandable and make the math work.
There's also I'd say a conservative political argument for a tax credit like this, and that's maybe part of the reason why there's a U.S. version of this that had very broad bipartisan support across Republicans and Democrats, and that's that there's a lot of pressure potentially on our public programs like OAS and GIS if we don't do something to close this retirement savings gap. I mean, they're the most expensive programs in the federal government. They're expected to rise, faster than inflation, and they're really important programs. So that when these retirement gaps open up and when you start to see seniors' poverty creep up, the instinct of a lot of elected people is to increase those programs, which is we've seen that happen in the past. So if we don't get ahead of those issues by encouraging people to save, long before they're in retirement, like through this type of program, you're going to have more fiscal pressure there. So even though there's a cost associated with this program and it's non-trivial, it's much, much smaller than the total OAS cost. And we think it could also take pressure off those government programs as well at a time when government is looking for areas of kind of future cost savings.
Okay, so then let's talk about the numbers. The proposal focuses on the small employer retirement plan tax credit at $1 to $2 billion. I got to confess, you could drive a truck through those two numbers. What's with the wide delta, the difference in results between carving $1 billion for the tax break and $2 billion?
Well, the main reason for the uncertainty is we don't know what the take-up would be. So we provided in the paper a range of different scenarios depending on how many more new plans are created. So as of today, the baseline level for new retirement plans created in Canada is pretty low. So it's only about 5,000 or so new plans that we think are created every year. So if this tax credit manages to boost that significantly, which would mean, a success in the program, it would mean an increased cost for the program as well, because it's providing essentially a subsidy for those employers that are setting up plans for the first time. If take-up is lower, then it means a lower cost. So we provide a range of scenarios. And that's where the $1 to $2 billion over 5 years estimate comes from.
What moves the lever on take-up if it isn't the tax credit itself?
It depends on how it's promoted would be one factor, right? So we talk in the paper about the importance of actually, not just having a tax credit, but having a promotional program that goes along with that. So that means engaging benefits and retirement advisors and consultants that work with employers every day to encourage them to set up programs. Potentially working with accountants and others that help small and mid-sized businesses file taxes and claim tax credits, and then just making the process of claiming the tax credit very easy, because we're talking about people that, employers that don't have a big accounting or benefits department, right? These are smaller employers that might have 30, 40 employees. They may not even have a dedicated HR manager or controller. So if it's very easy to claim, there'll be more take-up. If the government makes some effort to promote it, that's really important too, because we've seen examples of tax credits in Canada and the U.S. that are designed to help, but there's not really an education or communication campaign that's built around it. So, if there's more of that, we should see higher take up and therefore, more a bigger impact on coverage.
So what that means is a proactive supplier side. You need knowledgeable suppliers that, together with the tax credit, explain the value of the tax credit, but also help the employer take those steps necessary to actually do the enrollment, getting the plan set up, and having the confidence that it isn't going to be such a big deal and such a big hassle that you don't even want to get started on this. So I think making it easy for the small employer to get involved and make this happen is an important part of the sales process, the convincing process. This is a good thing.
Yeah, it feels like dragging a horse to water and trying to make it drink. If 9 million Canadians do not have a workplace retirement program, and your research predicts the tax break would expand coverage by at best 500,000 more Canadians, what about the other 8.5 million?
Well, the way that Australia, UK, the way they've dealt with it is to actually more compulsion on the part of the employer, where they must enroll their workers into a pension plan. That's the next step. And Alex, you've thought about it more than I. You think that's really impossible in Canada to go that next step?
Well, I don't know if it's impossible. I mean, it's a question of timing and feasibility. So when we looked at the different options, we looked at what happened in Australia, as Keith mentioned. We look at the UK, where they also have every employer's got to enroll and contribute to plans. We looked at the US, where they have plans that employers are forced to contribute to, or the employees are forced to enroll in, but the employer's not forced to contribute. And we thought the best thing to do right now, we've got a challenging economic environment. Small and mid-sized businesses are already struggling. Cost of living is an issue. So we thought a carrot approach to start, which would make a meaningful impact. 500,000 people more saving. If you think about the importance of retirement to Canadians, this is not a small item. So this is not like helping them pay for a small expense. It's one of the number one or number two, up there with housing, financial concerns for people. So it's still a big number. But the timing right now for introducing what could be perceived as a new cost on small and mid-sized business, or a forced contribution for employees when there's no employer contribution, which is kind of what they did in the US, we didn't think the timing was good for that. So this would be the best step we could take right now in the current mandate, the current climate, to expand coverage, but more options to go in the future if we wanted to make a bigger impact on that 9.9.
I think what we tried to do with this proposal is to not make it so aggressive or big that it's an automatic no. And so I think, and again, this gets the ball rolling. And I think once it gets rolling, I'm actually optimistic that once employers see that it's not as hard or difficult as they think it is, that we get momentum and that we get good publicity and affirmations that this is a good thing to do, that we can move in the right direction, and that hopefully we don't need that extra stick of making it compulsory.
A lot of work has gone into expanding our public programs over the last, decade or so. So we've enhanced the Canada Pension Plan significantly. There have been enhancements to both the GIS and the OAS recently. And, we think that any retirement system that's healthy has to have a balance between public delivery and private sector delivery. Canada has a pretty capable financial services and pension sector. And especially with, advances in technology and competition over the last, 5 or 10 years, it's much better positioned to serve that small and mid-sized employer than it would have been before. So this, there's also an argument here that if you do this, it will help create and expand a market. And we saw this in the UK of providers who can help serve that small and mid-sized employer, and therefore improve competitiveness among group retirement plan providers and the options that Canadians have.
If Ottawa doesn't implement a plan to get more small to medium-sized business employees a corporate retirement plan, what does it mean?
I think you end up with a growing retirement savings gap, mainly among middle-class people working for the private sector without pensions. I think you have a continued competitive disadvantage for our small and mid-sized businesses as they're trying to grow in a challenging economic environment. And I think you also have increased pressure on government programs like OAS and GIS as, the private sector workforce that don't have pensions, struggle to save and plan for retirement on their own.
It means that you have a larger proportion of aging retirees that are not as well prepared for their retirement years as they could be if they had had this plan. So I think you are creating a lot of sort of discomfort out there down the road if we don't do this.
Gentlemen, thank you for your time and your insight.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Keith Ambachtsheer is the Executive in Residence and Director Emeritus for the International Center for Pension Management at the Rotman School of Management. Alex Mazur is the co-founder and CEO of Commonwealth. For the full report, go to cdhow.org. Thanks for joining us.